But hold on a minute. Your own party leader, Keir Starmer, couldn't actually tell us what a woman was. He said that a woman was an adult female the other day, and then he said, and trans women are women. Well, trans women are not adult females; they are biological males. So we don't even know what a woman is. So if we're going to have a single sex sport, how can we tell what it is? If a biological man...
This exchange exposes a problem British politics spent years trying to talk around. What happens when political language, equality law and the practical reality of women's sport collide? The immediate argument is about transgender participation in female sport, but underneath it sits a much bigger question. If politicians say that sex matters sufficiently for sporting bodies to restrict participation in some circumstances, while simultaneously insisting that there is no meaningful conflict between biological sex and gender identity, they still have to explain where the boundary actually sits. And that is where this interview becomes politically revealing. The interviewer keeps dragging the conversation away from broad appeals for sensitivity and towards a concrete question. When fairness requires a sex-based distinction, what definition are institutions supposed to use? There is also important context. This is an older exchange, and the legal landscape has subsequently developed. So claims made here about the Equality Act should be understood in the context of when this interview took place, rather than automatically treated as the current legal position. That distinction matters under the debate central standard of separating old political argument from current law. But as a political moment, the tension is unmistakable, because once politicians start making exceptions, they have to explain the principle behind them. If you value debates that get beyond the slogans and into what politicians are actually arguing, subscribe to Debate Central, hit like, and tell me where you think fairness should draw the line. Now listen carefully to this exchange.
Minister Charlotte Nichols had to say. This is about a trans woman swimmer, Lia Thomas, who won a women's national college race in America. A trans woman who is a fully intact biological male, beating the women. She says, as a former competitive swimmer myself, I know full well how much training is required for a title like this. Anyone trying to diminish Lia Thomas's achievement because of lazy transphobia should frankly pipe down. Huge congratulations to her. Is it lazy transphobia for a woman like myself to say that a man competing against women is not fair and is cheating, and that it is ruining women's sport? Is that lazy transphobia?
I think transphobia is very real, and this debate often gets very heated, and it's very important, I think, for all of us who speak about this in public to try and take the heat out of the debate and try and approach it in a sensitive way. And actually, the Equality Act already has provisions in it whereby you have a single-sex exemption for certain activities, which includes sport. So that can allow, for instance, sport to be for men or women only.
But hold on a minute. Your own party leader, Keir Starmer, couldn't actually tell us what a woman was. He said that a woman was an adult female the other day, and then he said, and trans women are women. Well, trans women are not adult females; they are biological males. So we don't even know what a woman is. So if we're going to have a single sex sport, how can we tell what it is? If a biological man is competing against women, he has an unfair advantage. So it's cheating, isn't it? Is that transphobia? Is that lazy transphobia, or is that a statement of fact?
I think Keir, when I heard him the other day, was very clear that women are adult females and trans women.
So he doesn't know what a woman is, because I'm a woman, I'm an adult female. A man who says he's a woman is a trans woman. That doesn't make him a woman, because he's not an adult female, is he?
Well, I believe that trans women are women, and they are included, yes.
And therefore it's absolutely fine for a biological man who says that he is a woman, who's got his tackle intact, has all the benefits of male puberty, strength, height and everything, that for them to compete against women in sport is absolutely fine and fair. You think that is the case, yeah?
So the individual sporting bodies, I think, will make decisions around individual sporting events. And
well, how can they exclude trans women if trans women are women?
So the Equality Act does allow provision. So if you start from the position that the Equality Act allows a single-sex exemption, which allows certain activities, for instance, to be only participated in or taken, or for only women to be part of that, it assumes rightly that trans women are included in that.
Well, they're not.
But then allows specific exemptions, and that is a provision within the Equality Act. As I say, this is
so you do accept that trans women aren't women then?
No, I said trans women are women. I said that.
But you could exclude some women from competing with other women because you're accepting that the trans women aren't women. Do you see how it's not possible to hold both ideas in your head at the same time?
No, I think it is, because I think actually this is a sensitive matter. This is a sensitive matter.
It is very sensitive. It's sensitive for women as well as for trans women, isn't it? When our sport is being destroyed by male competitors, and when our changing rooms, our hospital wards, and prisons and refuges have biological men walking into them who simply claim that they are women.
It's sensitive for everyone involved, which is why I started my answer by saying it's really important, in my opinion, to take the heat out of this discussion and to have a calm discussion about what the law is
and what a woman is,
and what that allows, and the decisions that allows people to make.
Do you think it is possible to have an unheated discussion when we cannot even agree what a woman is?
Well, I've set out how I would define.
Yes, and I don't agree with you.
And
neither does biological fact.
Part of having a debate is about recognising disagreements and having a calm, unheated discussion about it.
Do you think it's a bit strange that you're sitting there as a man telling me, a woman, what a woman is?
You asked me my opinion,
I did.
And I'm setting out what I think a woman is, which, as I said, is an adult female and trans woman.
And an adult female and an adult male. So a woman is just... Well, there's no such thing as a woman, is there?
Look, Julie, I think it's clear that you and I think it's clear that you and I.
And that exchange reveals something much bigger than a disagreement over one swimmer. It exposes what happens when political language becomes difficult to translate into practical rules. The central tension is straightforward. The politician argues that transgender women are women, while also pointing to provisions within equality law that can permit sex-based restrictions in competitive sport. The interviewer's challenge is essentially this. If biological sex can legitimately matter when determining eligibility, then politicians have to be able to explain why it matters and where that principle applies. That is the argument underneath the argument. And women's sport makes that question particularly difficult to avoid because sporting categories are not merely exercises in personal recognition. They exist to structure competition. Age categories exist for a reason. Weight categories exist for a reason. Disability classifications exist for a reason. And male and female categories historically exist because physical differences can matter enormously to competitive outcomes. That does not mean every sport presents precisely the same considerations. Different governing bodies have developed different eligibility rules, and those policies have also changed over time. But it does mean that simply demanding greater sensitivity cannot settle a dispute about competitive fairness. Sensitivity is about how people should be treated. Eligibility is about which rules should apply. Those are different questions. And this is where the political response in the clip struggles. Repeatedly saying that the discussion should be calm is perfectly reasonable. Public debate on sex and gender frequently becomes unnecessarily hostile. Transgender people should not be subjected to abuse simply because society is debating difficult questions about law or sport. But lowering the temperature cannot become a substitute for answering the question. When voters ask politicians where a boundary sits, they expect something more substantial than an appeal to tone. There is another important distinction here. The interview repeatedly moves between sport, changing rooms, hospital wards, prisons, and refuges. Those environments are not automatically governed by precisely the same considerations. Competitive fairness in sport is not identical to privacy in changing facilities, safeguarding in refugees, or risk management in prisons. Good policy requires those distinctions. Otherwise, both sides can end up arguing from the most emotionally powerful example, rather than addressing the particular rules governing each situation. And politically, that is where this issue became so damaging for Westminster. For years, relatively simple questions about sex and gender became tests of political identity. Politicians sometimes appeared more comfortable repeating approved formulations than explaining how those formulations would operate when competing rights or interests came into contact. Voters noticed that. They notice when a politician can state a principle confidently but becomes much less certain when presented with its practical consequences. And once that happens, the controversy stops being exclusively about transgender policy. It becomes a question of political credibility. Can politicians define the categories contained within the policies they support? Can they explain when biological sex is relevant? Can they explain when gender reassignment protections are relevant? And can they explain what happens when those considerations conflict? Those are legitimate democratic questions. There's also a danger in pretending that asking them is inherently hostile to transgender people. The debate central standard is important here. Transgender people deserve dignity, while robust scrutiny of safeguarding single-sex services. Medical policy and equality law remains legitimate. The same standard should apply in reverse. Concern for women's sport should not be used as permission to demean transgender people as individuals. A functioning political system ought to be capable of holding both ideas simultaneously, protect people from harassment and discrimination, and debate rules governing sex-based categories openly. What has made this subject so combustible is the tendency to treat those objectives as mutually exclusive. And there is a wider lesson here about political language. Words used in legislation and public policy eventually have consequences. They determine eligibility. They determine rights and responsibilities. They influence how schools, sporting organizations, employers, and public bodies make decisions. So definitions cannot simply remain philosophical when institutions need operational rules. That is why the strongest moment in this interview is not necessarily the most confrontational one. It is the moment the discussion reaches the contradiction between an expansive political statement and the acknowledgement that circumstances exist in which sex-based distinctions can still be justified. Once you concede that distinction, the serious conversation begins. Which circumstances? According to what evidence? Who decides? And what safeguards should exist for everybody affected? Those are much harder questions than repeating slogans from either side. And because this is an older interview, there is another lesson worth remembering. Political arguments do not stand still. Court judgments, legislation, regulatory guidance, and sporting rules can subsequently change the framework in which an old exchange should be understood. The debate central framework specifically requires old clips not to be presented as new developments and proposals, guidance, legislation, and court interpretation to remain distinct.